trying to dry the soils, which essentially would, if it's not successful, it would delay construction of the parking lot until next spring, or do the option of excavating and bringing in imported materials. Another issue we should talk about on the parking lot is something that we discussed during the September 29th progress meeting with the USDA, is the pavement on the parking lot. With the soils, we suspected some of the soils out there were going to be questionable because of the amount of rain we've been having. And with the site generally draining from west towards east and north, we anticipated that the farther east you got on the site, the worse the soils would be. It was discussed that if we proceed to get the parking lot constructed now and still get the pavement put down, based on the saturated soil condition, there's more chance that we could get settlements and yielding during the freeze thaw or the winter and wind up having to rip up more of that bituminous in the spring and do patching before we do the final layer of bituminous. That's not a good situation for the contractor, being it's more work for him. It winds up in more cost for the city. So we discussed the option of just getting the parking lot built to a gravel base for the winter and holding off on any of the bituminous until the spring. We checked with the county building official, and he said that in that situation, you can get a temporary certificate of occupancy for the building with a gravel parking lot, and we would need to meet the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, access to the building, which we should be able to do because we would have all the concrete done this year, and utilizing that apron on the east side of the building and the sidewalk connecting to the door on the east side of the office portion of the building, we could have an accessible route that we could designate over the winter until we can get the permanent route established in the spring. So the discussion was we're going to continue to monitor this issue over the next handful of weeks, but at this time it appears that the most likely option is that the decision will be made to hold off on the bituminous until the spring. In essence, it's going to be easier to fix any issues that show up in a gravel surface next spring rather than to have to fix them in the first layer of bituminous that shows up. Another issue that we thought would be of interest to the council is precast wall panels. As we noted, they're currently under construction or under production at Wells Concrete. Photos were included in the packet tonight. Delivery of the panels was scheduled to begin this week, but with the soil correction being done and the fact that the contractor utilizes the gravel parking lot to bring in the trucks, they didn't want to bring in the trucks until they had the gravel base put in. They talked to Wells Concrete, and Wells was able to reschedule the delivery of the panels to next week rather than this week. And in fact, Wells had said that as they get towards the end of this month, their workload is lighter, so they actually have more people they can dedicate to this project. So even though the panels are arriving on site about a week later than anticipated, they think the erection can be done within about 2 days of the original target completion date. And there is no effect on cost to the project for the rescheduling of those panels. Continuing on through the memo, or I'm on page 4 now of the memo, USDA activities. As you know, you had approved pay request number 1, change orders number 1 and 2 last month, and they were all subject to concurrence by USDA. The USDA has concurred with all of those now and has signed off of them, and copies of the signed documents are on file in the administrator's office. On your agenda tonight, you have 3 items to consider for action. The first is pay request number 2. The contractor has put together their pay request and submitted it to us for review. We reviewed it and we have no issues with what they're asking for. At this time, they're asking for approximately another 13% of the general conditions, which brings that total to about 29% of the project total. They're asking for approximately 27% of the earthwork for the clearing and grading that they've done so far. And they're asking for approximately 45% of the precast wall panels to cover the production costs. Copy of the pay request as submitted on the AIA form from the contractors attached. And based on that submittal, we transferred the information to the USDA required form, and a copy of that is also attached in your packet. We did review the pay request with the USDA representative at the meeting on September 29th. They were fine with it. The only thing is, right now the panels are considered a stored material because they're not actually in place yet. And they're stored not on our site, so they're not under the ownership and control of the city yet. So it gets a little tricky in that if we approve the payment, in order to pay them as a stored material located on another site, we would need to get a lien waiver from Wells Concrete. Otherwise, if the timing of the payment is such that the panels arrive on site by the time we actually cut the check, then they're no longer a stored material, and that issue becomes a moot point because they've actually arrived on site and they now are here and an actual material that we own and have on our site. So that'll just, more than likely, it would be a timing thing where if we approve the pay request tonight, we would just hold the check until sometime next week when the panels have arrived, and then USDA would be able to sign off on the pay request, and we could get the check cut to the contractor.
That would be next Monday
But they're going to start arriving, but it's going to take them a while to get them all on site. But since they've only asked for 45% of the payment, we only need 45% of them to arrive on site before we've met the value that's been asked for.
Is there a problem with,
Yes,
The
exactly.
balls can be kept in the air.
Pardon?
is there a problem with getting liens signed?
Yes. Usually, a lien waiver essentially means you've been paid for the product you've delivered. And so in order for Wells Concrete to provide a lien waiver to us, would mean that the contractor would need to pay them. Well, the contractor doesn't have the money to pay Wells Concrete until we pay the contractor. So it's a little bit of a shell game with the money, is where is the money and who's got it before you can have signed documents that say you've got it. So we had this discussion at length in the meeting, and the USDA is standing firm that either they need to have a signed lien waiver in hand or else the materials need to be on site. And we think the timing is such that that's the easier requirement to meet.
What would be the worst case scenario we'd be facing here? To make them wait another few days for their check?
Right, we would approve the pay request tonight, so then I would sign it, and contractor would sign it, you would sign it, it would go to the USDA office, and it would sit there until we confirm that the panels have showed up on site. And then they would sign it and send it back to us. So yeah, in essence, they would wait roughly a week for us to cut the check. Mark, is that your understanding of it?
Yeah, and I don't see any issues with it.
Really, the
I
only
mean, we have 30 days to pay, don't we, in the contract?
Yeah, so
We could also take a record, but that's not what's been proposed here.
no.
No.
So we're thinking that the timing option is the practical route to go. If it comes to the point where we actually need a lien waiver, we'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it. But assuming the pieces fall into place here, no pun intended, then we should be able to make the payment accordingly. So that's the first thing that will be considered when we get to the action portion of this item. The second item is change order number 3, which is what we talked about at that subgrade issue for the 1-foot correction on the 14,000 square feet on the east side of the building. We do have a copy of that included with the memo. It includes providing 12 inches of correction and the according amount of rock. Now, Chosen Valley Testing will be out there to monitor the correction as it's put in, and we'll be taking tickets on the rock as it's delivered. So if it comes in that quantities are notably less than the scope of work included in the change order, there would be a credit for the portion of that rock not used that would be show up on a future change order on the project.
And how about if it's over? And another change order?
Well, it depends if the contractor submits a request. If he doesn't say anything, we won't say anything. But
And you mentioned that east and west have been tested, south is not.
Correct.
Is it possible that we could have another change order if the south is too saturated?
it's possible, but keep in mind that south parking lot is the light duty. That's
Okay.
just intended for the public.
So it's not a
So
stringent.
not as critical. I mean, even if that parking lot had to wait until next spring, you could, rather than pay a correction for this fall, you could say, let's wait and build that one next spring.
And that property doesn't actually drain away from that.
Correct. Yeah, they had about half of that roughly cut to grade, so they were able to test roll part of it, and they said what they could see and what they could test looked like it was going to be okay. So the geotechnical, he's optimistic that one's going to come out okay.
Mhm.
So it looks like we're just on the eastern portion of the site, which is where the drainage flowing that way, we anticipated that side was gonna be the worst, if any of it was.
I do have a question, Joe.
Yes,
The
sir.
way it sounds that when you did the testing last year, that soil was marginal, is that correct? Too susceptible to rain and wetness?
Yep, yeah.
So I guess my question is, me living in Minnesota, and we have rain, wouldn't the contractor take this into consideration when he bids a project like this, that there could be a possibility of rain once they open up the site? Why should we expect the taxpayers or the property owners in Kenyon to pay for another 30,000 or 28, well, your bill, I'm sure, is over 30,000. You keep on getting these change orders, and these property owners keep on having to pay the bill. And
Right.
sometimes the contractor should have bid this knowing that in Minnesota we have rain.
Well, and I understand your point. He wouldn't have bid it because we didn't specify what we specified was a structural section for the parking lot. We specified two things. We specified a structural section, we specified that they had to get the subgrade prepared. Now, if we were sitting here, now what we didn't know is at the time we did the geotechnical report and at the time we put the plans together, we didn't know exactly the schedule, based upon the letting date and the processing the contracts and the actual start of construction, when we'd be constructing it. I mean, if we were sitting here, if this was 2 months ago, and we were sitting on August 11th rather than October 11th, there would be the opportunity to say, rather than a change order for $30,000, we'll give you a change order for 2 weeks, and you work that soil for 2 weeks at no cost to us and get it to dry. Now, the trade-off would be the time for the money. The other thing would be if we hadn't had the wet August and September and we were sitting here in a dry condition this October, that soil likely would have passed the test roll, and again, we would be building the gravel. But unfortunately, it's the fact that the way the schedule worked out, we're building the parking lot in October. We did have significant amounts of rain in August and September. So we can give the contractor the time they need to do the soil corrections without importing material, without the additional cost. What that means is we won't get the parking lot built this year, which means we can't get a certificate of occupancy and substantial completion. And so rather than a substantial completion date of roughly March 1st, we'd be out to, if they get back in the site on May to work on the parking lot, we'd be roughly substantial completion of July 1st.
Mhm.
So it's really an issue at this point of, if it's a question of the cost of the project versus the schedule of the project.
Every month now, we've had change orders. Every time we come here, it's this much money because we didn't find this, and all of a sudden now, and I think we got,
And one of the unfortunate things that
Contingencies.
I don't mean to,
right?
I don't mean
We've
to,
always had those figured in.
correct.
Yet the contingencies, it's never, well, okay, we overbid by 100,000, so we're gonna give you 100,000 back.
Well,
And we have to wait until the project is over to see if they're actually going to do that. Here, it's just, we add on, we never subtract, except for the insulation, which might be like $27 or something.
mhm. And well, there's going to be another one coming too, because with the trash enclosure, we reconfigured the curb line and eliminated some curb, so there'll be a minor credit coming there. But a good example, and actually this is a good meeting, because we had First Street, was the project we talked about just before this. First Street is a typical engineering type project where we do everything on a line item basis. And so that's why, without having to come back to the city for change orders, we had the one on the rock excavation when we found rock we didn't anticipate.
and that
But
one,
everything
that one,
else-
you didn't put enough, you didn't bore enough soil borings.
That's exactly
You
what I
know,
was.
so
Yeah.
you guys screwed up there, and it cost us how many dollars? Now here we've got a problem with wet ground, which we can't expect the property owners to pay for the fact that it rained too much.
Well, and the point being, my point was that on a line item contract, you can make adjustments without having to have change orders because you're paying a unit price for those items. So whether you use more gravel or less gravel, or more excavation or less excavation, you pay for it by the yard or by the ton, and the end result, the end cost is based on those quantities. This type of project, being an architectural project, was bid lump sum.
Right.
Here's the plan,
And
that
yet the
includes
lump
these
sum
items.
is.
Correct, and any
is a lump
deviation-
sum, and yet we're getting change orders.
Well-
Because, it's a lump sum, except we didn't figure on this.
And-
Why
Oh,
didn't
we
they-
didn't figure
Don't they
on
figure
this.
on that maybe there is gonna be some wet weather, so they already built this into there? And, I mean,
So they're treating it like a line item deal.
Yeah, this here, I'm in agreement with Fred and Richard on this here. First of all, I'm saying this here, if we had certified people that come in and do a boring, I'd like to know how often they went down through this whole area and how deep they went. Now, anybody that is working with soil and that should know and suspect, and they went down how many feet, and they let it go, and now they're saying it's the rain. We all know that there's rain, that we all know that we have a problem. But the idea is, well, we can maybe keep this whole thing down at a cost, and as we go along, oh, we got a new change order coming in. It's adding and adding. I'm looking at this here. I'd say we could have $100,000 stuck into this
Well, and
before we're done with the whole thing. We had it on the building, now we have it on the parking lot. Where is it gonna stop? Now, I'm going back to saying, the people that did the soil testing should be responsible for this and should be standing right here and explaining to us what took place.
well, and
Now, I would like to know how deep they go.
I can
and
try to
how
respond.
often.
We do have the report. I don't have the entire report with me. There'd be a file in the file if we want to take a recess and I can go find it and pull it out for you. But in the geotechnical report that was done, I included a couple of pages in your report, and I highlighted the portion where it said, for the pavement construction, the resulting subgrade, which is the native soil beneath our aggregate base, following the site grading should be scarified and recompacted, then a proof roll test should be performed. So all that happened. Proof roll test should be performed to determine soft or unstable areas. If rutting or localized unstable areas are observed, those areas should be subcut, moisture conditioned, and recompacted, or removed to a stable depth. So those are basically two options. If you find a soft area, which we did, your options are remove the soil, work it until it's dried and suitable again, and then put it back in, or else remove it and replace it with imported material. The next paragraph says, depending on the weather during construction and the construction sequence, which is basically the time of year, scarification or recompaction of the native soils may be impractical, and consideration could be made to stabilizing the subgrade using a coarse aggregate material, an additional aggregate. So they did note in there that what they found was that if the conditions were right and the time was right, the soils would be okay. Or even if the conditions weren't right because we had rain, but you still had enough time, you'd be able to work the soil. But in the situation where we had the sequence where we're in the time of year where we couldn't get the soil dry and we had significant rainfall, the other option would be to remove those soils and replace it with engineered fill material. Now, the reason we didn't include it in the project is because then it would have been included in the bid, and the bid would have been that much higher. And if we hadn't used it and asked for a credit, you're never going to get 100% of the credit back. I mean,
We're
It's
paying
more-
out 100%.
it's more cost effective to bid just what we need for the project, and if we wind up needing more, to have a reasonable price for that additional work, rather than to overbid and over-design the project and ask for credits back, because they'll never credit you back for the full value.
But isn't that what we're paying the contractor for
Yeah.
and you for,
Yeah.
is to know what we need
Yeah,
and bid accordingly?
yeah.
Correct, and
As
at
you
the time,
said,
when we bid the
a year
project,
ago, it was
when we bid the
figured-
project in June, well, when we did the soil exploration was last September. And obviously, we don't know what the weather's gonna be 12 months down the line. And we didn't know at that time, through the design process and the work sessions with the council and the final approval by USDA, when exactly the bid date would be, when exactly the start of construction would be. As it worked out, we bid the project in June, and we didn't get construction started until the middle of August because of the contract processing, USDA review and all of that. Even at that time, we still don't know, when we were sitting there on August 1st, we didn't know August was gonna be the 5th wettest on record, and we didn't know we were gonna have 100-year rainfall events in September. You know, those conditions they used to be, in contracts, they were called acts of God, where, you couldn't design or build against an act of God if something happened like that. Essentially, if it's something that's out of the contractor's control, it's the owner's choice to what route do we want to go. if we want to keep the project on schedule, then we need to utilize the option to get this work done in a time-efficient manner, which is to replace the saturated soil with the rock material, which was not included in the original bid because it wasn't known it would be needed at that time. It was known as a possibility, but you don't want to
You're
build.
dancing around this,
Yes.
you're dancing around the issue,
No.
and the issue is, it started in the very beginning, and we were not told the truth. You should have been in there and said the boring samples, which we don't have in front of us, all over this parking lot, should have been there directly for every one of us to say, and then just like we have, like we were gonna have the hose tower, or we were gonna have this here, we should have brought it in and said, okay, guys, now this is very susceptible, this piece of land over here is questionable. It may cost you an extra $100,000. Okay, we could look at it and gamble then and say, yeah, okay, go for it, or we'll take our chances. We're asking right now to take our chances and let the soil dry. A 100-year flood happens, and you can't control it, nor can anybody else control it. But the bottom line is, we got every one of those individuals out there are paying their bills, paying their taxes, and we're the ones that get explained to, and we're talking about, oh, it's only gonna be this much, or we didn't know this here. You're not coming up with the truth.
And then you throw the old, if you gotta stay on schedule. So
Yes.
you put the pressure on us, if we don't approve it, then it's our fault because we
Yep.
don't stay on schedule, we're on schedule.
Yep.
You know, I resent that.
I do too.
Well, I'll be honest, I resent being accused of not telling the truth.
I'm sorry about that, Joe.
It's
You have been hired by us.
Correct.
To represent us.
correct, and
I
I'm
feel
doing that to
if
the best
you're
of my
not
ability.
representing us, you're just a pass-through guy, and, okay, they give me a bill for this, okay, here's why the bill.
I can tell you that,
And you're not
again, in 26 years,
defending us.
in 26 years of doing this as a professional engineer, in this situation, on a contract like this, it's the owner's responsibility for the cost of the soil correction. You have the choice. You have the choice of the additional cost for the soil correction or the additional schedule to avoid the soil correction. That's the choice. It's not my choice to make. My role as your consultant is to identify the situation, identify the options, and I can recommend to you which in my opinion is the better one to utilize. But at this time, the situation we're in with the project we've got, the conditions we've had, the soil we've got, these are the options we're faced with. We can tell the contractor, yes, do the additional correction, and historically, that's an owner's responsibility for the additional correction because additional scope of work we're asking them to do that we didn't include in the original bid because we didn't know if it would be needed, and so we didn't want to pay for something that wasn't needed. Or we can tell them, don't do it, try to dry the soil, but we have to be ready then, if they're not successful, that we delay the completion of this project until next summer.
Why weren't we
Completion
told
of the
that?
building.
Or the third option is.
No, we would not be able to bring the panels in if we can't get if they try to bring those, they won't be willing to try to bring those trucks in on that soil without the gravel, the strength of that gravel to bring them in.
You have a third option too. The contractor does it at his own expense, and maybe the profit margin isn't quite as big. It might be just down a little bit. Because you probably built this in already in your bid.
The contingencies, yes.
I don't know how we would utilize that option.
Well, I mean, that's
I don't know that we can force the contractor to,
Yeah.
I mean, the contractor's done what the contract specifies, is they've prepared the subgrade, done the test, we've had an objective geotechnical engineer. They weren't hired, Chosen Valley Testing was hired by the contractor, they were hired by the city.
Yeah.
And the geotechnical engineer is saying, we're saying that soil is unstable and not suitable for construction, needs to be either dried or replaced.
So if we were told that already at the beginning, we would not be sitting here right
And
now.
I understand that, Councilmember
explaining
Hankey,
that.
but
And
I-
that's the reason why being upset about it is the expenses that are showing up that weren't projected. If it would have said, yep, we gotta go ahead and do it, okay, we need to have this soil compacted again. But we didn't get that information, and that's the part that is really hurting.
Well, it was in the geotechnical review.
Technically, but
Yeah,
it wasn't even bid on or anything of the sort, or made out. Everything else is put in there. It tells you how many length of pipe you need, how much of this, how much of this. Why was that not put in there?
It was identified, well, it's identified in the plan as this is the structural section we need based on our native soil being suitable. It also identifies that the subgrade has to be checked and certified prior to construction of the parking lot. And this is part of that process. I mean, when that's sitting out there as a grass lot, you know, I can't predict with certainty whether or not we're gonna need extra gravel. If it's a line item contract, I can put a line item in there so I get a price, so if we need it, I can utilize it. And I can come back to you and say, we're gonna use more of this item, we've already got a price of $10 a ton or $20 a ton, and it's gonna be this many more tons, so expect that line item is gonna increase. But with this type of contract, we don't have that arrangement. We specify the scope of work, they give us a price on it. And if that scope changes, rather than being able to just increase a line item, we have to come back and say, we need an incremental increase in scope, and it's this value, and we need a change order for that value. Now, the contingencies have been talked about every time when we had the cost estimates. Corey was very clear to say, we always anticipate 3 to 5% contingencies on the projects for unforeseen conditions. And the contractor put it very well when I was talking to him last week. You know, he said he'll be glad when we get above ground because you can predict better what you can see. The more you can't see, the more chance there is that something unforeseen is going to come up. And that's what we run into in the foundation soils and the parking lot soils. They're similar conditions in that both were, because of the conditions, were unsuitable at the time we got there to do the work. They were unsuitable for the work that was going to be done. Now, once we get above grade and start to do things like the gravel and the building, the amount of unforeseen and unanticipated conditions should go down, and the corresponding change orders and the values of the change orders should decrease as well. But unfortunately, we're in the most challenging part of the project right now, and the elements of nature are working against us, or have been working against us recently. The contractor said he was having breakfast and he was listening to the news, and they came in the news and reported that there hadn't been a 5-day stretch since, I think it was April 23rd until October 1st, where we had not had notable rainfall. We've never had that. Typically, you have that period of drought at some point during the summer or fall, and we never did run into that. But that's a minor aside. All I can say is that this is a situation we're in, and we have two essential options. One is to delay the schedule of the project. One is to increase the amount of rock to maintain the project schedule. I wish I had a different presentation to make to you, but unfortunately I don't. Now, we have reviewed this with USDA. We discussed it at the September meeting because the contractor knew they were about ready to do the sub-roll, the test on the subgrade. And we talked about what would happen if it failed, and the state architect laid out, he said in the email, he said, this is the process you need to go through. And we followed that process. So we haven't gotten their feedback yet on the change order, but we're assuming that they know that this is a situation. They've given us the process to follow, which was the same as we had laid out too. So we don't anticipate any issues with their concurrence if the city chooses the option to approve the change order and to perform the soil correction.
Well, I guess I see no other option but to approve the change order, and just let it be noted that we don't like it.
No, and I don't like it either. I don't like having to come here and request that we spend money.
If you don't like it, maybe you and the contractor can split the cost of that, since I think it goes both ways there as far as liability.
No, I think we've got 5 states full of, I don't like it.
Yeah,
Things that happened this year.
Every change order costs us money with the engineer. I just see what we spent, this last check you're writing.
yeah.
I mean,
So I just have a couple of comments on this. I've listened to all this. I've talked to some of you individually about this beforehand. And basically, the first thing I'm going to tell you, for whatever it's worth, you can take this however you want. I've been involved in as an economic development director and as a city administrator, many different building projects. I've never seen one where you've got, and this doesn't address your concern about not knowing about the possibility that some of the soils could need compaction or be compacted if they're wet. It didn't say that they were bad, period, because if it had, then the spec would have called for that soil to be removed and it would have been in the contract. It said if it was wet, okay? So that's the one thing I've never seen in a contract before that says it may be wet. And the problem is, how are you gonna spec that out? Are you gonna say replace 6 inches? Are you gonna replace a foot? You can't figure that out because you don't know if there's been, 5 inches of rain, which we had probably more of in August, or you had 1 inch of rain. So that's my first concern is, how would you spec that out? Secondly, if this had been earlier in the season, this would have had time to be turned and dried out. All this damn rain came in August and September, and unfortunately, we didn't have time the contractor didn't have time to dry it out. If it had been earlier, we wouldn't be talking about this. So the unfortunate thing is, we had rain every single month this summer that was way above average. And so I think in some ways when I look at this, and I've told some of you this, I'm amazed we haven't lost more time because of the weather, because it just hasn't stopped until the last week or two. So I don't know how you would have put that in there in the contract, in all fairness. Second of all, the contractor basically doesn't, this just isn't something you put, and I think I already said this isn't something you put in a contract unless you have 100, you have identified poor soils. And when they do borings, this is the standard amount of borings, and I can't tell you off the top of my head how many they did. If they had done more borings, it wouldn't have made any difference because you would have had, instead of 2 borings in the area of the south parking lot, you would have had, say, 7 or 8. The 7 or 8 would have said the same thing. They would have said that the soil may be susceptible or is susceptible to moisture, and as such, may need soil correction at that time. So the more borings wouldn't have made any difference. It would have told us the same thing, and we had all the rain, and unfortunately, when you have this much rain in construction projects, I've seen this happen more times than this, where they've had to do field soil correction. And this is how construction projects are, road projects are. We have to have a third-party soil correction company come in and do field soil, testing in the field. That's how they do it because the ground's exposed at that point, and they do the testing, and then they come back and say, okay, we need to add this and we need to add that. The unfortunate thing with this is, because of all this damn rain, we've had to keep putting more and more into this. But, I don't know what else you could do when you've got 150% of rain in a 3-month period or more. So, I understand everybody's frustration with this, but I have to say that this wouldn't be normal. This is normal how this contract was written. I can't pull out a bunch of examples and show you, but that's just call this my opinion from past experience.
The fact is, we hired Bolton and Bank as engineers and Lowe's as contractor, not either of them as fortune tellers. If we could predict what the conditions were going to be exactly, we could have cut a lot of other corners probably.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. And to follow up on the administrators, he made a good point in that the borings, what we found on site is not inconsistent with the borings. It's not like we hit a patch or a pocket of loam or peat or organic materials that we didn't find because we didn't have borings. We found clayey soils, just what the borings had shown that in the right conditions, they're suitable. And when they get over moist, over up in moisture, they're not suitable for the structural capacity. And we could have over-designed the project, and instead of a bid of $2,113,000, we might have gotten $2,175,000. It wouldn't have been noticeable. You wouldn't have noticed the difference in that magnitude of the bid. But if we wouldn't have used that and I would have asked for credit back, we wouldn't have gotten all of that credit back. But we would have paid for the design up front though, too. You know, to Councilman Barsness's comment about the engineering costs. If I had designed it up front, we'd have paid for it up front, and then even if it hadn't been used, that engineering cost would have been incurred unnecessarily. So, you know, it's unfortunate that I'd rather bring you a low-based bid and then pay for an incremental change to still keep the cost as low as possible, rather than to over-design it, get a higher bid, and then not get the value for what we had bid. And that's one thing we should know too, that actually with this change order, there is something tangible that's being installed there. You are getting an engineered fill material, so you are getting every ton of material that goes out there. You're getting something for that money you spend on it if you choose to approve the change order. You are getting that material in your parking lot, which is a better structural material than the native soils.
So, and that's what my second point was. If they had put in the contract, 2/3 of that south parking lot area had to have 12 inches of fill added to it, we would have had that in the bid and we would have paid it. But if it didn't rain like it has, we wouldn't need to replace it. So you don't put that in there because if it hadn't rained, we wouldn't pay for it. And if you do put it in there, we pay for it no matter what. Well, it did rain, so we end up paying for it now, but if it hadn't been put in there and it hadn't rained, we wouldn't be talking about this. And then to me, that wouldn't be the right way to do it. The right way to do it is to say that what was in the spec, and maybe that should have been pointed out more to the council. Maybe we should have went through that in more detail, but that the soils were susceptible, and unfortunately they got wet, really wet, and some of them had to be extracted, and there has to be clean fill put in there. But that's how the spec was written. If it rained, that's what it said in the soil testing, but to put that in the spec and say, okay, the contractor's gonna cover this. The problem with that is, it sounds good, but what does that mean? Does that mean they have to replace 6 inches, 12 inches, 18 inches? You know, there's no way to do it. This is based on what they found. And what they found was that, X amount 12 inches needs to be removed, 12 inches of clean fill put in, and that's what the change order is based on. But to say that, well, we should have just put it, you could have put it in the spec, but then we would have paid for that no matter what. And what if it hadn't rained? We would have ended up paying for soil to be replaced that doesn't need to be replaced. So how do you quantify that? I don't know.
Well, I disagree with her, because if it's marginal soil and we put the way that supposedly the bid is, and then next year we get a whole bunch of rain, we don't have a good base, because that ground is susceptible to moisture. You're still going to have the moisture underground.
Well,
So there should have been because of the fact that it was soil that's susceptible to moisture, it should have been 12 inches right off the bat on the bid. Because otherwise, if it had been a dry year and you went ahead, you would have had a parking lot that when it did get a lot of rain, you would have had and you would have broken up parking lots, so there was a screw up there.
well, and I would just say that we don't need the extra foot. The geotechnical engineer is not recommending the foot on the west side of the building. If we had put, and the west side of the building, in terms of area, is about 1.5 times the size of the east side. So if we had put a foot in on the whole thing, right now we'd be paying for about 25,000 square feet of soil replacement that we didn't need, because based on the tests, they're not recommending for the west side of the
So
building,
the soil,
but they are for the east side.
the soil on the west side is the same texture?
Same general structural makeup, but with the drainage working generally from west to east, it's able to be dried. And keep in mind, the contractor's been out on site for several weeks now, and as they've been, and they've noticed right away when they came on site that, it's been very wet out there. As they've been working on the site, they've been trying to work this soil and prepare it as best they can. Now, fortunately, the test roll on the west side passed. They're not recommending, the geotechnical engineer is recommending a correction on the west side. So if we had designed a foot of correction on the west side, that would have been unnecessary and money would have been wasted. Unfortunately, the east side does need the correction based on the recommendation of the geotechnical engineer. And once the parking lot's built, the soil is going to be protected by the gravel and the bituminous and the rain. You know, when that rain hits right now, it has direct access to the soil. When our parking lot's built next year, if the rain comes, if we have the same amount of rain, it's going to hit that pavement, and virtually all of it's going to go over to the curb line, into the storm sewer, and out to the pond. So that soil is not going to get, you know, not even a fraction of the same moisture that it's
My
experiencing.
question is, why are you putting the tile in there and all this coarse rock, when you're using crushed rock that packs, instead of coarse rock that doesn't pack? You're putting coarse rocks in there so moisture can drain over the tile. You just
Well,
told us.
we're putting it's what's called a 3-inch minus. It's essentially rock that's with the fines taken out. We don't want fines because the fines can retain the moisture, and the fines can.
You told us there's not gonna be any moisture, so what's the deal?
Well, any groundwater that does get in the rock layer is going to drain differently than the soil. So if water gets in that rock layer, it could become perched because it's got a different infiltration rate than the soil below it. So more water could get into the rock than the soil can be able to handle. So we've got the subgrade graded the way the parking lot drains out towards the curb line. And the geotechnical engineer recommended that as well, that if you put in the foot of correction, you imagine you've got all this soil and now you've got this rectangle area basically that you've dug a foot lower and put rock in. If water got into that rock, it could get perched in the soil. So we put a drain out at the side, we grade that to drain and put a drain on the side of it, the trench drain, so that the water can get into the pipe, get into the storm sewer, and get out to the pond. Because the rock will have different drainage characteristics than the soil will around it.
Is that before it's paved, you're talking about moisture getting in there, or is that after?
Well, you don't want to take the chance. The cost of the drain tile in relative terms is minor compared to the amount of, the value of the excavation of the rock. So we put it in now to protect it for the life of the pavement, for the life of the parking lot.
There you just said, we don't want to take a chance, so why aren't you doing it on the west side?
Because we've got a certified geotechnical engineer.
Oh, west.
Oh, we got somebody that's got a degree that says we don't need it. Okay, that's all.
Based on construction industry
Yeah.
standards of practices that have been done for decades of projects, I don't know what to tell you. The project is,
We're just going around it.
So it is what it is. So we really don't have a choice.
Right.
We really can't hold on. Disappointing as it is, infuriating as it is in some ways, we really do not have a choice.
So
We
you
need
need
to
a motion
move
to
out.
approve the change order number 3?
Well,
I think we have
First-
to do the pay request first.
first we have the pay request. So do we have a motion to approve pay request number 2?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I would just supplement that contingent upon USDA concurrence.
Correct.
Okay.
That goes without,
Okay.
no, it doesn't go without saying, but
Just for the record.
Yes.
now, on to change order number 3. As I said, maddening as it is, I don't feel we've got a choice. I move we approve change order number 3.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-2. Moving along, construction materials testing service quote.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As standard on an architectural type project, there are tests that are required beyond what the building inspector does. So tests of say the concrete on the foundation footings, those types of things. And there are also tests that we want to get on the site work as well, such as samples of the Class 5 gravel base material, samples of the bituminous material, testing of the concrete for the curbs, those sorts of things to make sure that things are done per specification. Now, in accordance with the contract, that traditionally is the role that the owner retains the testing firm directly, so that the testing firm is working objectively on behalf of the owner, rather than working on behalf of the contractor. So we have gotten 2 quotes for the testing service. The two quotes are from Braun Intertech and from Chosen Valley Testing. Now, initially, the quotes they gave us, because it's an architectural project, they just first gave us a quote for the building services testing. The quotes were $17,280 from Braun and about $11,000 from Chosen Valley. Well, we went back to tell them that we also wanted the site testing included as well, but since Braun was already so much higher than Chosen Valley Testing, we just went to Chosen Valley Testing to ask them to revise their proposal to include the site work testing as well. And that's their subsequent proposal that is included in your packet. And theirs come out to a total of $15,844, and that includes the building testing and the site testing. That compares to Braun's proposal of $17,280 for the building testing only. So our recommendation would be the Chosen Valley testing contract in the amount of $15,844. Now, we did ask them to provide us with a cost for some optional testing that we might want to do in the parking lot in the spring.
And what does that entail?
Well, there's a way we could come back and test the parking lot if we want to, like take a core sample of the parking lot after it's in place to check the thicknesses of the layers.
Okay.
And if we want to bring on a nuclear density gauge to test the density of the parking lot after it's been placed and compacted. We can do those tests after the fact. What we've got in the base testing is sampling and testing while the construction's occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And so we can take samples, we can observe the compaction, we can take the samples back to the lab, and we can check the oil content and the rock content. But this additional testing would be if we wanted to come back in after the parking lot's constructed and do a core sample to verify the thicknesses and to do a nuclear gauge testing of the compaction.
And why would you want to do that? If you had doubts that
Yeah,
it's
is that not
uniformly
just
thick?
verifying that the inspector at the time did his job properly?
Well, it is, but the inspector, the industry's level of care is not that the inspector is watching every square inch of the parking lot. Because if they are, that essentially lets the contractor off the hook, because if the contractor could say, well, you inspected everything,
Yeah.
it's your fault it didn't pass. Well, no, it's the contractor's responsibility to make sure it passes. So if the inspector watches, if he's off from the site on a lunch break or something while they're compacting a portion of the bituminous parking lot, he didn't necessarily watch that part. So it's a safeguard that, we may or may not choose to have that additional testing done. But when I was talking with Chosen Valley about the testing, they said, do you want to have this included in case you want it? I said, you might as well give us a price now, and then we as a city can choose if we want to do it. Then we've got a price already. If we don't want to do it, then there's no cost.
So if you had suspicions that there might be an issue, in other words.
Yeah, if there's a reason why we thought that, something might not have
Similar to the boring samples where you've got borings but you don't have enough of them, and so, yes, you
No,
can have
no, it's
1 inch
totally
here,
different.
but because they didn't test it there, they come back with saying, yes, it's okay, and then we've got a sunken spot.
Well, and it's a little bit off on tangent, but MnDOT has gone to the route of where the way they test their bituminous is to come back after the fact and drill holes in the road
Yes,
after they pave it.
like a boring sample.
And typically, like on First Street, we didn't want to do that. We don't want to build a brand new road and then come back in and start drilling holes in it. It kind of defeats the purpose. So we'd rather not take a core sample of our parking lot unless we feel the need is really there.
So do they have that's what the nuclear?
Yes, we could choose to just do the nuclear and not do the coring.
Yeah.
So we could do, we can do the base testing that's included, and once the parking lot's constructed, if we want to go out and have the nuclear testing done, that would be the cost of the nuclear testing. And if we feel there's a need to get a core sample as well, that would be the cost of the core.
Judging from the difference in the bids, it's likely, I would say, that this company would have as good or better a price on doing those tests as someone else that you might go to after the fact.
Oh, yeah,
This just locks in the price at a known amount.
correct. So the recommendation is for the approval of the contract with Chosen Valley Testing in the base amount of $15,844, plus with owner's option, the city's option to choose additional testing if you want it, in the amount of additional $1,770.
Well, I make a motion that we approve it.
Second?
with everything that you said.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Update on Kenyon Road drainage issue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In your packet is a memo, the shortest memo I wrote for this packet by far. I think it's a three-page memo with 3 figures attached to it. As you know, a couple of months ago, you had directed us to go out and do some investigation of the area around Bergen Circle based on some input you had had from residents on Kenyon Road about drainage issues that they were experiencing. And so, at the last meeting, we had commented that we had the survey partially done, but we didn't have all detailed information yet to perform the analysis. We did get the survey done since then, and we have had the analysis done. In fact, in the audience tonight, I wanted to introduce Josh Pope, who was a professional engineer out of our Rochester office, who actually did the field walk of the area and actually performed the stormwater analysis with me on this project. So he's had a hand in putting together the information on the figures. So, going through the memo, the 4 main questions we were looking at is what contribution is the city street making, and the curb cuts making to the drainage issues that are being experienced. So, what area is contributing to runoff to the 2 curb cuts that are located in the cul-de-sac? What's the composition of the drainage area that's going to those 2 curb cuts? What portion is city property? What portion is private property? How much runoff is going through the north curb cut relative to the south curb cut? And then once the water goes through the curb cuts, where does it go downstream of there? So first, let's talk about the drainage area that contributes to the curb cuts. Figure 1, that was included with the memo, shows kind of a large-scale view. Shows the whole area around Kenyon Road and Englewood Drive and Bergen Street and Bergen Circle. So just show the general drainage patterns. Generally, things north of Bergen Circle are draining north and east. South of Bergen Circle are draining south and east back towards Kenyon Road. We actually did bring in contours. We have contours from the area we shot. We supplemented those with LiDAR data that we have access to. Figure 2 shows the area right around Bergen Circle. And on that, we outline the area that actually drains to the street. So the area that actually drains into the street, gets into the gutters, and then goes out through those curb cuts. Now we have it kind of color-coded. Blue is the hard surface area. Orange is the green space areas. Within those, the solid areas are in the city property. The hatched areas are in the private property. So in the city property, the solid blue is hard surface within the city's right-of-way. The solid orange is green space within the city's right-of-way. The hatched blue is hard space on private property. The hatched orange is green space on private property. Now, if you look down at the table, down at the bottom of that figure, what you'll see is a total of 0.67 acres on the very far right. A total of 0.67 acres drains to those 2 curb cuts. Now, when you look at the north curb cut versus the south, the north curb cut takes 0.44 acres. The south curb cut takes 0.23 acres. So about 65%, or roughly 2/3 of the water goes to the north curb cut. 1/3 goes to the south curb cut. Make sure I don't miss anything in my memo here. And the city, when you look at the breakdown between public and private property, for the north curb cut, it's about 40%, about 40% private. Oh, no, excuse me. The north curb cut is about 62% private, 38% public. South curb cut's kind of reversed. It's about 75% public, 25% private, which makes sense because everything, the topography is generally going south and away from Bergen Circle. So the areas to the north is draining towards the street, and less area on the south is draining into the street, more of it's draining away from the street. So the majority of the drainage area for the south curb cut is made up of the public boulevards and the public street. Whereas on the north curb cut, the majority is made up of the private property. On the drainage characteristics itself, once we identified the drainage area, we applied a standard storm sewer design methodology to estimate flows that would go through those curb cuts for the 2-year storm, the 10-year storm, and the 100-year storm. And you have to flip back to figure 1 where we summarize those flows. So what we found is, again, about 2/3 of the flow goes through the north curb cut, about 1/3 goes through the south curb cut. The peak flow rates in the 2-year storm are 0.84 for the south curb cut, 1.5 CFS, for the north curb cut. And going on up to the 100-year event, the maximum peak flow that we calculated was 3.73 through the north curb cut. So they range from 0.84 on the smallest storm on the south side to 3.73 on the largest storm on the north side. So that was the range of the flows we found. In terms of the depth that we would expect to be running through the curb cuts, just the depth of water running during those rain events, it ranges from about 1.5 inches in the small storm on the south curb cut up to about 5.5 inches on the largest storm on the north curb cut. So those kind of set the ranges for the flow rates and the flow depth. Now, the drainage flow patterns, once that water flows through the curb cuts, where does it go? That's what figure 3 is attempting to show. And what we found is, we can take the north curb cut first, which is essentially pointing straight down the back of the cul-de-sac. We found that there's a well-defined swale for about the first, let's sure get my dimension right. I wrote them right now. We found that there's a well-defined swale for approximately 55 feet downstream of the curb. And at that point, the contours tend to flatten out, so allowing the water to spread into a little bit larger area for about the next 40 feet. But then it becomes more defined again, and there's a clearer path for the water to follow. Coming out of the south curb cut, the flow path is fairly well defined for approximately 75 feet. At that point, the flow becomes less well defined and has the ability to spread over a larger surface area. So that essentially is the data collection and analysis we went through on Bergen Circle. Some of the general conclusions that we're finding is we did specifically shoot the centerline points of the road of Bergen Circle, and we compared it to the 1999 construction plan that the city provided to us. Because one of the questions was the road constructed as the plan showed? And what we found in general terms is yes. The high point we found was within a couple of feet of where the plan said it should be. So we confirmed that the high point is where the 99 plan said it would be. We didn't find any other information that's inconsistent with the 99 plan. So essentially everything shown in the 99 plan is consistent with what we found during our review and analysis. We're concluding that the drainage areas contributing flow to each curb cut are of reasonable size. Each one is less than half an acre. The two of them combined is about 2/3 of an acre. The peak flows that we calculated based on standard storm sewer design methodology are showing expected flows well within acceptable limits. When you think about a curved street and we put one of the catch basins in to collect flow, one catch basin can handle up to 5 CFS of flow. The maximum flow we found, looking at the table on figure 1, we found a maximum of 3.7, and that's in the 100-year event at the heavier of the two curb cuts. So we're finding that for all the different storms we looked at, all of the flows are within acceptable levels, at least the expected flows based on the calculations. We also found that the depths of flow, being on the range of 1 to 2 inches for small storms, 4 to 6 inches for heavy storms, those would be expected, reasonable expected flow depths during those rain events at the curb cuts. The contours we found, looking specifically at the north curb cut, the contours we found show that the water that's leaving the street from the curb cut should be directed well north of the property that's located at 316 Kenyon Road. As we did note, though, that there are some areas where the flow is less well defined and the flow does have an opportunity to spread out over a little bit of a larger surface area. But based on the investigation, there's nothing that we saw that led us to a conclusion of a definitive problem we saw that was being caused by a public roadway. Everything we saw that is that the road was constructed in accordance with the plan that was in place in '99. The drainage areas are